Well, earlier this week, I sat down with Gavin Newsom. I want to show you what happened when that happened, because it was pretty spicy. Plus, the latest on ICE. Will the president invoke the Insurrection Act? And in Iran, is action still imminent? First, the wait is almost over in less than 1 week. On Thursday, January 22nd, episodes 1 and 2 of the Pendragon cycle, Rise of the Merlin, arrive exclusively on Daily Wire Plus. Here's the truth. No one was ever going to make this. No one was willing to bring the legend of Merlin to life with the scale and conviction it demands. It's too big, too demanding, too risky. Again, the values are also different in this version of Merlin because it is all about basically how Christianity came to Europe. We built this company by doing what no one else would. Now we're doing the same thing with entertainment. Episodes 1 and 2 of the 7-part epic premiere for all Daily Wire Plus members. Be here when it happens. Join now at dailywireplus.com. Well, folks, on Tuesday, I sat down with California Governor Gavin Newsom on his podcast. He does a podcast. He sits down once every few weeks with somebody. He invited me on, so I flew out to Sacramento, and we sat in the governor's mansion in Sacramento and did what is about a 2-hour podcast. It is well worth the listen. You'll hear us go through a number of topics. It was a sort of fascinating experience, not only because Governor Newsom, of course, is the governor of the most populous state in the union, a state that I left back in 2020 with my company and with my family, thanks to what I believe to be serious misgovernance in California. It's fascinating because right now, according to the polling data, it is very likely that Newsom will be the Democrats' nominee in 2028. When you look at the potential field of Democratic nominees right now, I've said before, I think AOC is underrated as a possible nominee. She's likely to do well in places like Iowa and New Hampshire. The problem is once you move to the South, AOC's numbers start to dwindle. And she's not going to win California if Newsom is in the field. Kamala Harris right now in the polling data for 2028 is a placeholder. Just like every other election of my lifetime, after somebody loses, they remain the quote unquote front runner for the nomination for the next election cycle for a short period of time. And let's just say it's a rarity for somebody to come back the way that President Trump actually did in 2024 and then win a nomination after losing a presidential race. Typically, nominees who lose go away. Mitt Romney in 2013, if you look at the early polling, would probably have been the front runner for 2016, but obviously he was nowhere close to the nomination by the time we hit the next election cycle. So it ain't going to be Kamala Harris on the Democratic side of the aisle. Newsom has heavy fundraising power. He's obviously a governor of a very populous state. He has positioned himself as the quote unquote anti-Trump in the field. And he's done that by being very, very loud on social media. And so it was fascinating to sit down with him, ask him some pretty pointed questions about governance in California and where he thinks the country is going. And I think the entire discussion is worth listening to or watching. A few things about Governor Newsom. First of all, in person, very personable guy for sure. Most politicians are, by the way. Large number of politicians, very good in person. Gavin Newsom is very quick on his feet. He's a person who is going to spend his time, I would imagine, trying to avoid serious charges about the state of California. And he knows his own policy record, and he knows where the holes are. And so he's pretty good at sticking and moving with regard to the holes in those policies. We'll discuss that in a moment. The biggest problem for Gavin Newsom is a problem for the Democratic Party. In order for him to appeal to the broad middle of the electorate, he is going to have to jettison some core Democratic positions that are just unpopular with the American people. And so I think one of the reasons that Governor Newsom decided that he was going to have me on his show was specifically to do that, to make overtures to the middle. Now, you can decide for yourself how genuine you think those overtures are. You can decide whether you think the real Gavin Newsom is the moderate or whether you think the real Gavin Newsom is the former San Francisco mayor who has been radical rhetorically for a large part of his career. Or maybe there is no real Gavin Newsom, right? These are sort of the questions you have to ask about any politician. Anybody who sits down in front of you who wants to win your vote is a person who could be masquerading as a moderate, could be masquerading as an extremist, could be just masquerading all the time, right? You just don't know. And so I'm going to tell you, you should watch that show and you should make your own decisions about Gavin Newsom. We're going to play some of the clips from the show, largely because I think it demonstrates the difficulty that Democrats have moving forward as a party. Everything that Newsom said that sounds good is a moderate to Republican position. Everything he said that I think sounds not particularly good is a Democrat radical position that I don't think holds up under scrutiny. And so the question is going to be whether the base of the Democratic Party allows Gavin Newsom to become the nominee, even if they perceive that he is semi-moderate. Now, again, in policy, he's not particularly moderate. If you look at California, California is very immoderate in terms of its spending, in terms of its social policy around, for example, the trans issues, around things like DEI or immigration. Now, Gavin Newsom will tell you that his record has been more moderate than the actual state of California, and very typically, the more extreme policies he will attribute to the local officials in his state. Now, that's sort of his typical move here. In fact, this is something that I asked him about because I do think that it is indicative of a way that politicians very frequently will escape their own records. Instead of you judging them on their output, you're supposed to judge them on their intent, and then they can sort of blame everybody else for failure to achieve what they quote unquote wanted to achieve. So, for example, there was one point where I was questioning Governor Newsom about the fact that he had promised to build millions of housing units in California. I was really grilling him on the fact that housing prices in California are exorbitant at this moment in time, and they have been for quite a while. And I got him to agree that, overpromising and underdelivering is a bad road to make policy. And they usually are talking about using the power of government in order to facilitate and make that change happen, particularly on the Democratic side of the aisle. And it seems to me that is a recipe for disaster for the American body politic, because if you make promises that cannot be fulfilled because the system does not allow for it to be fulfilled, people inherently end up frustrated. And, I have relatives who still live in the state of California. I visit it routinely, and they're making a very good living. Right? I have a sister-in-law and brother-in-law who live in LA. They make a combined excellent living, and they're barely making their mortgage. And the housing costs are too high. The cost of living is too high. I believe the poverty rates in California on a cost adjusted basis are some of the highest in the nation. Right there with Florida, correct. When you look at the supplemental poverty index, when you look at poverty broadly, you find it's slightly above average. Supplemental Florida and California, right? If you're looking at real estate costs in particular, are extraordinary in the state of California. And as you say, you're trying to remove regulations, but the problem is that unless we are willing to recognize a fundamental reality, which is that the relationship of the American people with their government needs to change. I agree with that. And so, if you listen to him there, he sounds like a moderate, right? Don't overpromise, don't underdeliver. Government should probably promise to do less. I mean, that sounds like a Republican policy. And herein lies the problem for Governor Newsom and for the Democratic Party. The stuff that sounds good is him moving away from the rhetorical and policy radicalism Democrats have embraced. More on this in a moment. First, as we move into 2026, many businesses, including the Daily Wire, are ramping up hiring efforts to meet ambitious new objectives. But bringing those goals to life requires assembling the right team, and that's easier said than done. Today's hiring landscape presents unique obstacles, from sourcing candidates with niche expertise to sifting through overwhelming numbers of applications to find the truly qualified prospects. For companies facing these hurdles, our sponsor ZipRecruiter offers a solution designed to streamline the entire hiring process. Right now, you can explore what ZipRecruiter has to offer at no cost by visiting ZipRecruiter.com/dailywire. ZipRecruiter's matching technology really cuts through the typical hiring headaches. As soon as you post a role, you can see exactly how many qualified candidates are in your area. No guessing, no waiting around. The resume database lets you go straight to top candidates and access their contact information immediately. That saves both time and money. It's no surprise they're the #1 rated hiring site on G2. When you're running a company, you need tools that actually deliver results, and that's what ZipRecruiter does. Let ZipRecruiter help you find the best people for all your roles. 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the very first day. See for yourself. Just go to this exclusive web address right now and try ZipRecruiter for free. ZipRecruiter.com/dailywire. Again, that's ZipRecruiter.com/dailywire. Also, the American dream has always been about building something of your own, taking an idea, some hard work, turning it into a thriving business that you can call your own. For generations, entrepreneurship has been the cornerstone of that dream. Getting started used to mean gigantic upfront costs, technical headaches, a mountain of obstacles before you could even open your doors. And that's where our sponsor, Shopify, comes in. It's the tool that puts the American dream within reach for anyone ready to chase it. Shopify is the commerce platform powering millions of businesses worldwide, including 10% of all U.S. e-commerce and even our own Daily Wire shop. The best part? You don't need to be a web designer to get started. They've got beautiful, ready-to-go templates that match your brand right out of the box. Or, if you need some extra help along the way, their AI tools can handle everyday tasks like enhancing product images, writing product descriptions, and generating discount codes. And if you're worried about getting your brand out there, Shopify makes it simple to run email and social media campaigns that actually reach customers. Plus, if you ever get stuck, their award-winning 24/7 customer support is always there to help you figure things out. This year, turn those dreams into and give them the best shot at success with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial. Start selling today at shopify.com/Shapiro. Go to shopify.com/Shapiro. That's shopify.com/Shapiro. So there were multiple times in the interview that we did in which I pressed him on a particular radical Democrat policy, and he disavowed it. So this happened most obviously with regard to immigration and customs enforcement. So I asked him about ICE because obviously ICE has been at the top of the news. And as we've talked about on the show, the governor's press office put out a statement calling what happened in Minneapolis with regard to Renee Good, the shooting of Renee Good, as state-sponsored terrorism. And the governor immediately disavowed his own press office. One was a narrative that was immediately pushed by the Trump administration and Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem that she was a domestic terrorist who was attempting to run over officers with her car and was legitimately trying, not just this officer, but multiple officers. That was the original statement. I said at the time, I thought that was untrue. And then your press office tweeted out that it was state-sponsored terrorism, which, I mean, Governor, aggressive. I do have to ask you about that. Yeah. That sort of thing makes our politics worse.
Yeah.
I mean, it does.
Yeah.
I mean, our ICE officers obviously are not terrorists.
Yeah.
A tragic situation is not state-sponsored terrorism.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay, so again, they put out the rhetorically radical stuff, and then they back off of it. I also asked him about the sort of defund ICE movement that's gained all sorts of credibility in left-wing circles in the aftermath of Renee Good's shooting, and here was Gavin Newsom. AOC said this week that ICE should be abolished. You disagree?
Oh, I disagree when I think a candidate for president by the name of Harris said that in the last campaign. I came out, I remember being on Chris Hayes hours later saying, I think that's a mistake. So absolutely.
He sounds like a moderate there. I asked Gavin Newsom about why the Democratic Party hasn't done more, speaking about, for example, the Iranian regime. And he came out, he said the Democratic Party should do more with regard to the Iranian regime. Because right now, for example,
but the genocide issues.
Where are the members of the Democratic Party protesting and wearing pins for the protesters in Iran who are getting mowed down, maybe by the tens of thousands this week?
Well, I know where I am. I put out a pretty clear statement this week, and
I'd like to see more Democrats.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. And by the way, I also thought I thought it was the right thing to do, that strike, and I thought it was unbelievably effective and efficient, and had no problem saying that during the strike. Didn't wait for the outcome. So I marched to a beat of a little bit of a different drum, a little bit more nuance here. But there is everything's so black and white. There's nuance here.
Again, you can see him attempting to move to the middle on all of these issues. Right? Same thing with regard to the claim by so many Democrats, including Scott Wiener, who is the person now running for Nancy Pelosi's seat in San Francisco, that Israel committed a genocide, which is factually untrue. I quizzed the governor on that. And again, he said, I don't think that's true either. And then he sort of started to get, I would say a little bit slippery about why he won't just come out and condemn Democrats who are telling that lie. Right. Democrats have now been dragged into this conversation, some dragged, some run with, flags waving, into the conversation.
This notion of genocide.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, look,
Israel did not commit a genocide in Gaza. There is no standard by which Israel committed a genocide in Gaza, just on a factual level.
Just as a legal and factual level.
Yes.
Yeah.
What is your opinion of this?
My opinion is, I understand the tendency for people to make that, to assert that.
Why?
On the basis of the images and the proportionality.
Doesn't mean genocide.
No. And by the way, I agree with you.
And international and proportionality doesn't mean that if you kill my child and I then kill 7 criminals, that I've been disproportionate.
I'm not disagreeing with you, but I think but I understand that tendency on the basis of trying to reconcile the proportionate nature of how the war was ultimately conducted and the devastation.
I have a question. Why do you feel the need to create a permission structure for that sort of stuff? I mean, meaning it's not true. Yeah. Why not just say it's not true?
Yeah. Look, I don't know the definition, or I don't know the legal threshold. That's not my opinion. So I don't share that opinion as it relates to genocide. I do not agree with that notion.
Again, watch as he tries, again, to avoid the rhetorical complications of endorsing the radical side of his own party. Same thing with regard to the trans issue. I grilled him on why he believes, apparently, that a boy can become a girl, or does he believe that a boy can become a girl? Why has the state of California taken a wide variety of actions to, quote unquote, protect boys becoming girls, which is to say, in my opinion, be predatory toward children who are suffering from gender dysphoria and hormonally or surgically mutilate them. And he really did not have a good answer on this either. Again, this is the problem for the Democratic Party on these issues, that a good Democratic candidate is going to make the radical issues secondary or ignore them. But in doing so, he or she is going to piss off his own party. Because if you look at X today, X is filled with people on the left who are livid with Gavin Newsom for not endorsing every radical left position. Here is Gavin Newsom not being able to answer the question on trans, presumably for political reasons, since, again, we all know the biological realities here.
But this idea that Trump says people are going to public schools and coming back, having surgeries and coming back the next day is absurd.
No, but there are certainly cases in which kids are being, quote unquote, socially transitioned at school without parents knowing about it. I know some of the parents to whom this has happened. I mean, this is the fundamental question that lies at the root of all of this is the question that you're not wanting to answer, which is whether boys can become girls.
Yeah, I think for the grace of God. Yeah.
I mean, I appreciate the sympathy. I also feel terrible for anybody who's suffering with any sort of
I think it's been the case for
terrible,
generations, for time immemorial.
Again, just trying to avoid the question. So Gavin Newsom wants to be a moderate, right? At least he wants to play moderate when it comes to running in a general election, except when it comes to a couple of issues. One of them, of course, is Trump. And this is, I think, Gavin Newsom's secret sauce as a candidate is that he, in person, and again, rhetorically, when he's speaking with people like me, he appears to be a moderate or move toward moderation. You can believe him or not believe him. I'm just presenting you with what he was saying to me on camera. And then there is the stuff where he does not want to appear moderate, and that's particularly on Trump. So Democrats seem to believe that if they campaign against Trump in 2028, that will be enough. And listen, we can say that that's crazy, and that won't work. But I'm old enough to remember when Democrats campaigned against George W. Bush in 2008, right? He was on his way out, and they took George Bush and they hung him over John McCain, who was a large-scale opponent of Bush in a wide variety of matters, and tried to paint McCain as his natural heir. Well, I assume that Gavin Newsom will do the same thing with J.D. Vance, should J.D. Vance be the nominee. And so I pushed Gavin Newsom on the idea that he really believes the 2028 election is in danger of being stolen or overthrown. I don't believe that he believes that, because otherwise, why would he be running? If he truly believes that our elections are on the precipice of being overthrown. By the way, I don't like that on the right, and I don't like it on the left. I've been saying this for years. I've been perfectly consistent in this position, as with many of my other positions. Here was the exchange. If you go on Stephen Colbert and say you're worried there won't be a legit election in 2028.
But I feel that. I mean, if I believe that.
Do you really believe that?
I really believe that.
But then why are you running? Or why would you consider running?
I want to make sure because we have agency, we can shape the future. It's not something to experience.
But I didn't believe it when President Trump said it. So President Trump said in 2020.
I think I believe in it, but he tried to.
You truly believe that President Trump is going to try to run in 2028?
No, I believe that he'll try to wire the outcome in 2028. I really believe that.
This sort of stuff is very dangerous to me. Okay, so again, this is where he's staking his flag. He's staking his flag on the left with Trump is going to steal the election. The Republicans are just so terrible. And then on the other hand, he's sort of playing footsie with the middle. And then there is the third prong of Newsom, which of course is his record. Now, as somebody who left his state and took my family and took our company and moved it, and who visits the state pretty frequently and has to hear about the difficulties of being a police officer in LAPD or the difficulties of making a living in Los Angeles or San Francisco. I have opinions on how things work in California since I lived my entire life there and watched quality of life radically degrade over the course of decades. Gavin Newsom's position seems to be that his policies are better than other Republican states. He very often will not defend them on their own merits. Instead, what he will say is it's better than Louisiana or something. He tried to do this with regard to his tax policy, and I sort of said, well, I'm here talking to you, not to the governor of Louisiana, but okay. How about radically lowering the income tax rates in the state?
California has tax. I mean, there's 16 states right now. Let's talk about those 16 states.
Why don't we talk about California?
I'm going to. They tax their low-wage earners more than California taxes its high-wage earners. Let's talk about lowering those tax rates in those 16 states.
Now, what he's talking about, again, he doesn't want to talk about California. He wants to talk about the fact that if you go to some red states that don't have a state income tax, but they do have sales tax and excise tax, that it's possible that if you're a low income earner, you're paying a quote unquote higher percentage of your income than somebody who is a high earner in, say, Florida. And there's truth to that. So his brag is that the state income tax in California is very, very progressive. That's a brag for him. The question is, what is the goal of tax policy? Is the goal of tax policy, quote unquote, fairness? Because by that metric, you're going to have to establish when does a tax structure become, quote unquote, fair? When are the rich paying enough? And all the rest. Or is the goal of a tax structure a practical question? Meaning, is the goal of taxes to cover revenue for public services without killing the innovation and the job growth. Because, listen, if the goal is just to show that you're fair, it's very easy to do Governor Newsom's routine here. You say, hey, look, the rich people are paying a lot of money and the poor people are paying no money. Isn't that fair? The problem is that public policy is designed to create better quality of life, not to make you feel better in your innards. And so when you look at the state of California right now, rich people who create the jobs, okay, the lie that the poor create jobs in the United States or anywhere else on earth, it is and always has been a lie, which is why the poorest countries generally have the fewest productive jobs. It is people who innovate, invest, build, who end up creating the mechanisms by which everybody else's life gets better and they get paid. That doesn't mean that labor isn't an element of that. It means that labor is only one element of that, not the only element of that. So, to take, for example, California and Florida, the state to which I moved, and he loves targeting Florida, of course, because he sees Governor DeSantis as a possible counter to him. They had a sort of interesting debate a while back, I believe, on CNN, Newsom and DeSantis, which kind of ended in a tie, I would say. The private sector job growth in Florida since 2019 has been 10.6% versus 4.8% for California. And a huge percentage of that private sector job growth in California has been in the tech sector, large swaths of which are now seeking to relocate because of the tax and regulatory structure in California. So you can have a fair tax structure. You can be fully communist and have, quote unquote, the fairest tax structure where everybody's income belongs to the government and they redistribute it according to need, right? That's the communist way. It turns out not only is it not fair, because, again, how you define fairness is the question. The way I define fairness is people get to keep the products of their labor that people are allowed to achieve in consonance with their skill set and efforts, right? That is fairness to me. What people like Gavin Newsom, I think, mean by fair is that we can look at outcomes and determine whether fairness has been achieved. If we don't all make the same amount of money, obviously things are unfair. But the goal of tax policy is presumably to create a thriving state. Job growth in California is half that in terms of percentage in the private sector of that in California. Total real GDP growth since 2019 has been somewhere on the average of 2.3% every year. In Florida, it's been double that, like 4.6%. California had a major population decline. It was all domestic exodus. It was people who lived in California, like me and my family, moving out. And then the reverse of that, which I did discuss with him on his show, was achieved by in-migration from other countries. So from Mexico, from China, from other places. I mean, if you have a giant out-migration of your citizens and people from other countries are coming in, that is not a great sort of indicator of how well you are being governed, for sure. In 2024, for example, California lost 239,000 residents to domestic migration, but gained 361,000 international immigrants. Is that an indicator of economic health, of lifestyle health in the state of California? One of the things he tried to say about population in our interview was the governor tried to claim that, well, on a per capita basis, more people left Florida to go to California than left California to go to Florida. You can't use per capita for this. And I'll give you a very basic mathematical example. Let's say that you have a country with 2 people, and then you have another country with 100 people. And let's say that 40 of those 100 people go to the tiny country. And let's say that of the original 2 people in the small country, one of them goes to the more populous country. Well, if you did that on a per capita basis, then the smaller country per capita sent more citizens than the large country sent to the small country. But that makes no sense. If you're a country with 100 people and 40 of them leave to go to a smaller place, and one of the 2 people in the smaller place leaves to go to the bigger place, why would you possibly then make the case that the smaller place is obviously more poorly governed because it's jettisoning people? That doesn't make any sense. There's certain statistics, this is how you play stupid games with statistics. Certain statistics ought to be measured per capita. Certain statistics ought not be measured per capita, pretty obviously. Okay, the same thing is true with regard to immigration policy. So we got into a tete-a-tete about ICE and about immigration policy, sanctuary city policy. He made the case that sanctuary city policy makes cities safer. You can make a case that sanctuary cities policies, they don't additionally add to criminality over baseline. You could theoretically make that case. I mean, of course, every crime that's then committed by an illegal immigrant in your city, if that illegal immigrant goes there because of the sanctuary city policies, is one more crime than would have otherwise been committed. But the case that he was making is that people don't even move into areas because of their sanctuary city policies, which I find hard to believe. I find it hard to believe that if you have a choice right now under the Trump administration of moving to a sanctuary city area where the local government will not coordinate with the federal government, or moving into a red area where the local government absolutely will coordinate with the federal government, that you're going to be more comfortable moving to that redder area. Well, I asked him about California's sanctuary city policies and sanctuary state policies, actually. And he suggested that actually California does a wonderful job of cooperating with ICE, which I think ICE might have some questions about this. You're pragmatic. You talk about your pragmatism all the time. Wouldn't best policy be to cooperate with ICE in the vast majority of cases? So instead of ICE going to, as you say, hospitals and churches to pick people up, they'd be going to jailhouses to pick people up.
That's exactly what they do in California. And we have over 10,000 that I've cooperated with since I've been governor of California. We work very directly with ICE as it relates to CDCR, our state prison. California has cooperated with more ICE transfers probably than any other state in the country. And I vetoed multiple pieces of legislation that have come from my legislature to stop the ability for the state of California to do that. So when it comes to the issues of violent criminals, when it comes to felons, people that are being released from the largest state system in the United States of America, California cooperates with ICE.
Okay, it's true for violent criminals. It is not true for people who say, let's say you've avoided 100 traffic tickets, you get arrested. You are not then reported to ICE. In fact, the law in the state of California is that police are not supposed to question individuals about their immigration status. State and local funds cannot be used to investigate, detain, or arrest people for immigration violations because that's federal law. And local police are not supposed to proactively share non-public information like home addresses. California will not release information about individuals unless they have been convicted of specific violent crimes, which means ICE has to ramp up their own surveillance efforts. And certain localities have been made ICE-free zones, which ban ICE from using any city-owned property as staging areas, which means that ICE then has to use private or federal sites only. Again, if the goal is to make your state into a sanctuary state, obviously that has some impact. Okay, the whole episode I think is really interesting. Again, credit to Governor Newsom for having me on. Credit to him for actually having a pretty open and I would say fairly both cordial and combative conversation about some of the key issues facing the country. Now, I've talked about the problems facing the Democratic Party. The problems facing the Democratic Party are pretty obvious. There's a big divide between their radical base and the moderation they're going to need in order to win. Gavin Newsom wants to campaign as the guy who cooperates with ICE, as the guy who wants to be at least moderate on the trans issue, secondary on the trans issue, who wants to be fairly moderate on foreign policy, who doesn't want to engage in a lot of the same sort of rhetorical radicalism of his own party. Will the base allow him to do that? I think probably not. He's been able to hide it so far by attacking Trump. I'm not sure how long that's going to last. So that's one problem for him. And of course, the other problem is his record in California. There are going to be a lot of sort of Willie Horton type ads that come out against Governor Newsom as he runs for the presidency. Now, the problem for the Republicans, Gavin Newsom's a very talented guy. I don't think there's any doubt when you watch that episode that he is good on his feet, that he is slippery when he needs to be, that he does a convincing imitation of a pro-capitalism moderate. If you think that's an imitation, maybe that's the real Gavin Newsom and he's had to slather it over with radicalism to get where he wants to go. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But anybody who thinks that Republicans are going to waltz to 2028, I do not think they will waltz to 2028. I don't think Democrats are going to waltz to 2028. It's going to be a dogfight. And there are problems inside both parties, obviously. The Republican Party is pretty divided on some major issues ranging from the involvement of the state in economics to foreign policy. The record of whoever is the Republican nominee is going to come up for scrutiny also. So here's what I would urge. For both parties, maybe you ought to take a look at what the American people want. Maybe you ought to take a look at the closeness of every American election for the last 12 years and think to yourself, maybe if I tacked toward the middle, maybe what Americans really just want is normalcy. Now, maybe the primary structure prevents normalcy from actually taking the floor. But as we are seeing from the polling data, more and more Americans are identifying as independent. And the reason for that is because all they want is return to normalcy. I think that the reason President Trump won in 2024 is he was by far the most normie candidate. By far. Joe Biden was not a normie candidate. He was dead and he was radical. Kamala Harris was not a normie candidate. She was an empty suit and she was radical. Donald Trump took the middle position on nearly every issue. Will Republicans do that? Or will they be so high on their own supply that they go rhetorically radical over and over and over for no apparent reason? while pursuing mainstream policy. That's going to be the big battle of 2028. Meanwhile, President Trump is threatening to deploy more federal forces to Minneapolis, given the amount of unrest over there. According to the Washington Post, President Trump threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act in Minnesota on Thursday, raising the prospect of sending U.S. troops into Minneapolis, despite opposition from state and local leaders to quell protests over a recent federal immigration enforcement surge. They're not just protests, by the way. Some of these have involved actually attacking ICE vehicles. We had video yesterday on the show of people attempting to break into a gun box that was in the back of an ICE vehicle. Meanwhile, Kristi Noem at DHS has blamed another Minneapolis shooting on Tim Walz, the governor, and Jacob Frey, the mayor of Minneapolis. That shooting, of course, occurred when a person that ICE was trying to take into custody apparently attacked ICE officers along with a couple of others with shovels. Here's what she had to say.
You know, this kind of violence is perpetuated by what we hear the governor saying, what we hear the mayor in Minneapolis saying, and their irresponsibility is extremely reckless. Governor Tim Walz has my phone number. I have called him and talked to him and said, listen, you let your city burn down in 2020. Don't do it again. President Trump wants to keep everybody safe. We're enforcing federal law. We're protecting every single American. Work with us. I want to remind you that Minneapolis itself, under the mayor's leadership and the governor's leadership, released almost 500 criminals out onto the streets rather than bring them to justice and turn them over to federal authorities. So they know they're releasing murderers and drug traffickers on the streets of Minneapolis. We're out there making sure they don't harm American citizens, and we're getting attacked while we do it. But we're going to continue to do our work and do what's right because it's what President Trump promised the American people.
Now, Noem was asked if the president of the United States would invoke the Insurrection Act. She said, I don't know what he's going to do at this point.
Do you think that there needs to be an Insurrection Act invoked?
Oh, I think that the president has that opportunity in the future. It's his constitutional right, and it's up to him if he wants to utilize it.
Do you think he's likely to do it?
I don't know.
But if he does it, would it lead to more deadly killings in Minnesota if the Insurrection Act is invoked?
If anything doesn't change with Governor Walz, I don't anticipate that the streets will get any safer.
Democrats in a variety of states are planning to introduce bills allowing residents to sue federal agents for violating their Fourth Amendment rights against unlawful search and seizure. According to Fox News, New Jersey Democrats are trying to establish the state as a sanctuary state. Governor Walz, for his part in Minnesota, put out a statement, quote, I'm making a direct appeal to the president. Let's turn the temperature down. Stop this campaign of retribution. This is not who we are. And an appeal to Minnesotans. I know this is scary. We must speak out loudly, urgently, but also peacefully. We cannot fan the flames of chaos. That's what he wants. Noah Rothman has a good piece over at National Review pointing out the game that Tim Walz is playing. Quote, he called on state residents to protest loudly, urgently, but also peacefully, and to peacefully film ICE agents, as though repeating the word peacefully negates the danger that protesters put themselves in when they insert themselves between armed law enforcement officers and their targets of arrest. Indeed, he set out to convince the passionate and impressionable they'd been deputized in the campaign of resistance he envisions by the state. What Walz is advising his citizens to do is likely to result in more violence and potentially more death. That, of course, is exactly right. Stephen Miller, the most passionate of the president's senior advisors when it comes to a wide variety of issues, including immigration, told Fox News, what we are watching right now is clearly an insurgency that would require the Insurrection Act.
You only have to read their own words and hear their own words and judge their own conduct to understand that this is clearly an insurgency against the federal government. They are describing the federal government as an occupying force.
Okay, the ICE chief, Todd Lyons, similarly said, we're not watching peaceful protests in Minnesota anymore.
Yeah, Martha, without getting too much into the investigation, it was a federal vehicle. But just to the point, that is not peaceful protesting. That's not what the governor, that's not what the mayor is calling for. That's anarchy, plain and simple. That's impediment. And unfortunately, that's what ICE agents are encountering every day. What we really need is elected officials to say, you know, you can peacefully protest, but not like that, not throwing fireworks, not breaking into vehicles, not putting your hands on ICE agents. But instead, they just keep increasing the rhetoric. And that's why you keep seeing this night after night.
Lyons said that Democrats are incentivizing this.
Fortunately, again, you know, I hate to sound like a broken record, but when you have elected officials that are saying, go out and do this, go out and impede ICE, you know, go out and protect your neighbor, and they're doing it like this is this is what happens and leads to it. And unfortunately, you know, these videos come up and there's only one side to it. And we're constantly having to go on the defense. But the men and women of ICE are professional. They're professional law enforcement officers. That's what they're out there doing every day. And again, at the end of the day, we have to make sure our men and women of ICE and all law enforcement go home safe every night.
Again, invoking the Insurrection Act under Section 252, which is presumably the section that the president would invoke, allows the president to enforce the law. Basically, if people are stopping the enforcement of the law, you can invoke the Insurrection Act to effectuate the enforcement of that law. Meanwhile, over in Iran, the Iranian government is announcing apparently they're going to keep the internet shut until March. So for those who believe that things are going swimmingly in Iran, that now the temperature has been turned down by the Iranian government, I have a bridge to sell you in Brooklyn. That is obviously untrue. The Iranian government has basically shut down protests by stationing troops pretty much everywhere in the country and threatening to shoot people if they go outside. According to the Wall Street Journal, a fierce crackdown by Iranian security forces that has killed thousands of people protesting against the country's autocratic leaders has forced demonstrators off the streets in some cities, with residents reporting an eerie quiet after days of escalating violence. Iran's government has blocked the internet and deployed large numbers of police and troops, by the way, including tanks, in an effort to quell the biggest threat to the regime since 1979. Iranians said that they were afraid to leave their homes. That is why when you hear public officials, President Trump had said the killing has stopped. Well, I mean, the killing has stopped because the Iranians literally put out the Revolutionary Guard on street corners and said, if you show up outside your house, we'll kill you. Ali Vayez, Iran analyst at the International Crisis Group, said the reason is very clear. The regime has created a bloodbath. According to human rights activists, which is one of these groups, they say that they've confirmed at least 2,600 deaths and more than 18,000 arrests. Estimates have ranged from that range all the way on up to the tens of thousands. Unclear at this point what's true and what is not. Certainly at least thousands of people have been murdered at this point. The regime has massacred its own people in large numbers. The president of the United States, of course, said people should maintain their presence out in the streets, that help was on its way. We'll have to see what the president is intending. Now, some people are claiming the president's going to do nothing. I find that hard to believe. He drew a red line. That red line has been breached extraordinary fashion. I think the president wants to do something meaningful. He doesn't want to shoot a missile and hit a camel in the ass. I think he wants to actually do something meaningful if he's going to do anything at all. The Wall Street Journal reports something similar. Apparently, President Trump was advised a large-scale strike against Iran was unlikely to make the government fall and could spark a wider conflict. And for now, we'll monitor how Tehran handles protesters before deciding on the scope of a potential attack. So it's not as though everything is off the table. I think the question was one of efficacy. If you launch a few airstrikes against random IRGC facilities, does it actually change the regime or allow the protesters to remain out in the streets? Or does it simply result in a bit of a firefight in the Middle East and the Iranians continuing to murder people in the streets? Advisors told President Trump the United States would need more military firepower in the Middle East, both to launch a large-scale strike and also to protect American forces in the region from retaliatory ballistic missile attack. It appears, according to the Wall Street Journal, that a wide variety of regimes in the Middle East, ranging from the Saudis to the Israelis, actually, suggested that a potential strike should not be undertaken until all the pieces are in place. So Saudis, Israelis, Qatar, like everyone apparently was saying no for different reasons. Qatar doesn't want to strike because they're backed by Iran. Saudi apparently doesn't want to strike because they're afraid they're going to get hit by missiles coming the other way, and the Americans don't have enough force strength in the region to repel that. The Israelis presumably concerned about the same sort of thing. NBC earlier had reported that Trump's advisors couldn't guarantee the Iranian regime would quickly collapse after a U.S. strike. Lindsey Graham, who obviously the senator from South Carolina is in close touch with the president on this sort of stuff, he said the question is, should it be bigger or smaller? I'm in the camp of bigger. Time will tell. So we'll have to see how things unfold. And again, caution does not mean doing nothing. Caution is called for, obviously. You know, looking at the best available plan and then taking the best available plan is better than doing something precipitous. Negotiations are not on the table here. So the question is going to be what the actual military measures that could be undertaken would be, or economic measures or cybersecurity measures that could be taken would be to undermine the regime at this point. According to the editorial board over at the Wall Street Journal, they say an effective U.S. policy would support Iran's people for as long as it takes for them to overwhelm their regime until it becomes paralyzed, shows cracks in its leadership, and can no longer hold back the crowds. So obviously the Iranian people are going to have to do the heavy lifting here. But I also do not think that the president is going to repeat Barack Obama's mistake in which he drew a red line in Syria and then did absolutely nothing before handing Syrian control over to the Russians, essentially. So we'll see what happens from here. Meanwhile, the White House hosted the opposition leader of Venezuela, Maria Corina Machado. She met with the president. She presented him with her Nobel Peace Prize, which he accepted. Now, again, I totally understand the gesture from her. And she's obviously attempting to change the actual regime in Venezuela, and she's very grateful to the president for having ousted Nicolas Maduro. The president taking the Nobel Peace Prize, again, would I do that? Would you do that? Probably not. Trump said on social media, "It was my great honor to meet Maria Corina Machado of Venezuela today. She's a wonderful woman who's been through so much. Maria presented me with her Nobel Peace Prize for the work I have done. Such a wonderful gesture of mutual respect." We'll have to see whether the White House is going to put additional pressure on the Venezuelan regime to move toward elections. Right now, they're putting pressure on the regime to do what we want, economically speaking. The reality is that if the regime doesn't change before President Trump leaves office, there will likely be a reversion to type in Venezuela, meaning I wouldn't count on a Democrat, including Gavin Newsom, to keep the pressure on Venezuela in terms of prohibiting their transfer of oil abroad. I think that requires a Trumpian figure in order to actually do that. The reason that Trump has not backed Machado at this point is because he doesn't believe that she has the capacity to consolidate power in the country thus far. More than half of Venezuelans currently say Machado should lead, as opposed to 14% who endorsed Rodriguez. I think the basic idea here is that U.S. officials, according to Axios, see Rodriguez as the best candidate to reform the oil sector and comply with Trump's wishes without alienating regime insiders, the military, and armed gangs, all of whom could take the country into chaos. If the U.S. backed her as leader, then the United States might have to engage in a full-scale occupation of Venezuela. That presumably would be the concern. Joining us on the line is Dr. Mehmet Oz. He serves as the 17th administrator of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Dr. Oz, thanks so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Good to see you again, Ben.
So this morning, the Trump administration brought out its new healthcare plan, focusing on bringing down costs in the health insurance industry, particularly, but also drug prices, some other areas. What are sort of the key points that Americans need to know?
Ben, this is about putting patients first. It's about making sure we put patients in front of profits and other pure and self-interest that's hindered our healthcare system. So we want to slash drug prices. We want to bring insurance premiums down. We want to make sure that we hold insurance companies accountable, and we want the whole system to be transparent. Because, Ben, for a marketplace to work, the buyers need to know what they're actually getting. What does it cost? What's the quality, et cetera. So let's walk through these. Issue number one, drug prices. What we don't want to do is to cap prices, which would drop productivity, reduce the number of innovative solutions that will cure cancer and drive Alzheimer's back and deal with all the crises that hurt the American people. Because the number one thing the president has said all along is keep us innovative, keep America on the cutting edge, because he knows that the big opportunity is to get Americans to want to work a little longer because they're so healthy, they're so vital, they're so productive. They want to still stay engaged with society. So that drives trillions of dollars into the U.S. economy. So how do we balance those two needs? Keeping America healthy and vital and strong and making sure that we can afford it. Well, the president argued that it's feasible because right now we spend 3 times more than our European counterparts for the exact same drug, made in the same factory, bottled in the same place. And that doesn't make any sense. And so we went to the pharmaceutical companies and said, hey, look at me in the eyes. We know, and you know, that you've been getting away with price gouging and global freeloading from other countries as well for the last several decades. This president will not tolerate it anymore. Work with us. Be patriots. Fix the problem. And to the last one, they've all said yes. They've come in. They've been willing to participate, the major companies. We haven't gotten to the smaller ones yet. And for that reason, we now have a bunch of contracts with pharmaceutical companies where they agree voluntarily to reduce their prices so they're the most favored nation pricing here in America. It's fair. It works. It turns out that these companies have maintained their valuations. They haven't been hurt by these deals, even though they've taken significant financial haircuts. The president wants Congress to codify what we already believe works. We don't want to go any further. We don't want to cause any more problems for any pharmaceutical companies, for any parts of these negotiations. We just want to grandfather in people who have been there and make sure that going forward in future administrations, the drug companies stay committed to this deal structure, and that the U.S. government doesn't overreach its needs and start to do crazy things like cap prices in the pharma space that actually would hurt their innovations. That's the big first step. Number one, most favored nation, acronym MFN. You'll be hearing that a lot. Second big area, how do you make insurance companies accountable? Well, first off, the money that they're getting, this is a good example for the Affordable Care Act, as the president calls it, the Unaffordable Care Act. Is a problem because they just take the money, their valuations go up. The money actually, eventually, some of it gets down to the people, but premiums still keep rising. So the president said, from now on, we want the money going to the people. We want to make sure that as much as possible, we drive down prices in the insurance space fairly. And there's a way of doing that called cost sharing reduction. It was actually in the One Big Beautiful Bill. The president put it in there, and yet Democrats stripped it out. It's a smart way to run insurance. It actually drops the prices for everybody by more than 10%. So we want to try to get those elements of the program back into this legislation. But we also want insurance companies to tell us how much are you taking home of the premiums and how much are you paying out for the benefits of the average American people? What value are you providing? How many months do people have to wait to get a simple doctor's appointment? Tell us exactly what's going on behind the scenes so you're accountable and so people can pick the best companies out there. Because if we're giving the average American money in their HSA account or in their pocket to buy insurance, they need to be educated about which ones to pick. And finally, Ben, and you're a big proponent about this, just be transparent. I mean, shed light. What's the first thing we do when you, as a surgeon, when you're called into another operation for a colleague? First thing you do is open the wound up and put better light in there so you can see what's going on. Light disinfects all as well. So we need to actually be transparent in what things cost. If you are doing business with Medicare and Medicaid, those are the agencies that I regulate. We want you to post on the wall, very clean, so in plain English, exactly what you're getting. What does it cost? And what are the other options that you may have as a patient? This is all, by the way, stuff that we've been talking about. Let's just put it into a law that everyone can, for the foreseeable future, point to and say, because of that, you got to be fair with the American people.
So, Dr. Frost, I want to ask you a couple of quick questions on each of these areas. So when it comes to lowering the drug prices, for example, obviously the biggest problem we have with drug pricing is that Americans pay a different price than people in other countries are paying, and that's because of the collective bargaining in those other countries where governments are basically cramming down their own prices on the drug companies. And then you squeeze the balloon in one area and it inflates in America, essentially, where we pay the remaining sort of market price. Is the presumption here that these companies are now going to go back to other countries and say, listen, the American people are not going to foot the bill for this. You're going to have to increase the price that you pay in France because we're having to decrease the price that we pay in the United States?
It's exactly the message we're delivering. No more global freeloading. And I'll tell you a specific example where we've already done this, the UK, who may have been the worst offender. And just to underline what you're saying, when you get a cutting edge new drug that saves your life, for example, with a bad cancer in this country, the Europeans don't get it for several years. So there's actually a significant delay because they're not willing to pay. So we're being very transparent with European leaders and people in those countries that what you think is the best possible medicine really isn't, because you're not willing to pay towards the kitty to save lives. Listen, how does NATO work? NATO works because everyone antes up money so you can defend the continent of Europe. America pays too, by the way. But we are asking other countries to chip in. Same thing, as you have external threats from NATO, we have internal threats from diseases that plague all humanity. So why is it that America is footing the bill to develop the drugs? So we pay most of the R&D expense. But then in addition, we're paying 3 times more, as you point out, for those same products. So we're saying to the UK, for example, we just did this deal. You need to spend a little bit more of your GDP on medications. They've agreed. Companies are seeing that there's results here because the president can use tariffs and other tools. He can say, listen, you may not care about medication prices. You're willing to shove it down the throats of these companies, but we're going to cause other problems for you using the other levers that our economy has. So don't hurt us on an area where you should actually be aligned with us by saving American lives. And they're going to come on board.
So, Dr. Oz, when you move to the area of lower insurance premiums, one of the big points here is send the money to the American people, sort of like an HSA, as opposed to sending it directly to the insurance companies. The question is that when it comes to the insurance industry, it is the regulations, not necessarily the subsidies, The subsidies are results of the regulations. The regulations under Obamacare make it so that you can't get certain types of plans. They also ensure that there's no upper limit on coverage. They also ensure the elimination of quote unquote pre-existing conditions. Well, the combination of all that means that insurance companies are no longer insurance companies. They're basically health cost providers, meaning that if you walk in and you have stage 4 cancer, they are expected to cover you, and they're going to defray that cost by charging somebody else a higher price. And we're making sure that people don't, quote unquote, escape the system if you're young and you're healthy by forcing them to buy a comprehensive insurance plan they wouldn't otherwise normally buy. If I'm 21 years old, I really don't need a comprehensive insurance plan in the same way that I do when I'm 65 years old. So how much can we help just by sending people checks directly as opposed to really rewriting the regulatory structures around Obamacare? And are there plans to rewrite those regulatory structures?
It's not an either or. We need to do both. You've raised all the issues Republicans have been barking about for the last 15 years. We have got to make this real insurance. It's a discount card right now. And so what you described, for example, are association plans where companies can bond together and say, hey, listen, we got enough purchasing power now, so we need a discount. We need to have better ways of allowing the private sector to engage Obamacare. Let me just highlight something that underlying this issue you just raised, which is a very important observation. When Obamacare was created, it was called an exchange. Why was it called an exchange? The idea was that half the people on Obamacare would be federally subsidized. People who don't have means, you want to sort of get them as they leave Medicaid and enter the workforce, give them some level of coverage. But the other half of the people in these Obamacare ACAs, the Affordable Care Act created entities, were supposed to be from the private sector. Small businesses, mom and pop shops. I go to a diner. I've got 6 employees. Give me discounted, accessible, affordable insurance, and I'll buy them for my employees because they're working hard. I want to be a partner with them. So it was supposed to be like that. But if the federal government is throwing money at the problem and whatever it takes to buy more and more coverage with rules that don't make sense, as you point out, all of a sudden it's too expensive for that guy who runs a diner. So he has to now forego buying health insurance because he couldn't do that and pay his employees a living wage and afford to have his business. And so we're actually hurting the people we're trying to help most with this. So the things you mentioned have already been discussed. We want that ideally to be part of this plan, but the president wanted a framework. He wanted to architect the ideas that we believe are so fundamental to making healthcare affordable in America that he won't compromise on them. Within that framework, to make it work more efficiently, all the things you point out need to be included. By the way, the cost sharing reduction that I mentioned is another one of those examples. You would never run an insurance company without being able to make sure that people can pay their copay and their minimums and all that stuff. And it just helps deal with that in a more sophisticated way than what's going on right now, which is the insurance companies just game the system that drive up prices in one area, which of course, people who know it take advantage of it. People don't get taken advantage of. We don't want that in our healthcare.
When it comes to the transparency point that you're making, obviously one of the great frustrations is you go into the hospital, you get a bill, it's $1 bajillion for a broken leg, for an x-ray or whatever it is, and that's not the end price that you end up paying. Now, obviously the insurance companies are part of that bargaining process, but the other part of the process, and maybe the bigger part of the process, is the hospitals and the healthcare providers, because what they are doing is they are negotiating different rates with different insurance companies. And so they are very often putting out a price that they know they're never going to get from the insurance company. They put that out to you, and then it looks like the insurance company covered this gigantic price. And so there's this whole game that's being played. How much of the focus on transparency should be placed not on the insurance companies, but actually on the healthcare providers themselves?
Needs to be focused on both. As you point out, the game is played in many different ways, and the gaming of the system happens in different ways for that reason. But remember, the marketplace is not just individuals going to a doctor and deciding which physician is going to give them a better value, because it's not just what they charge, but what do they get for that money? But right now, you get a discounted insurance policy, but you can't find a doctor. That's why we want the transparency to include all the things that you might want to know about. But the real market, Ben, is made by commercial insurance, commercial employers. Right? The people buy commercial insurance. They're the big companies. They have 1,000 employees and they want to get the best value for their employees. Remember, their most important resource are those people. They want them to be healthy. They want them thriving. They want them at work and happy with what's going on. Plus, it's a way of building loyalty within the workplace. So they work their tails off to get the best value. They have trouble finding the prices. We're also, by the way, going to stop down the middlemen who are getting paid an inordinate amount of money just to connect the pharmacy benefits companies into the workplace. So there are these brokers that make deals. They're working this whole, it's like stockbrokers, right? They're behind the scenes making all these deals happen, but you don't know who they are. You don't know what they're charging. And so we don't want all that. We want there to be so obvious what the prices are that you can make the decision as an employer. And by doing that, you'll drive value, because now you've got two hospitals competing, because what does it cost to do a hernia? If it's $500 for you and $5,000 for the next guy, or MRI scan or access to a treatment, well, then you're going to make a wise decision. But again, you have to create a true marketplace. Marketplaces require transparency of pricing. I've got to know what I'm buying. And whenever you don't know what things cost, there's a reason for it, right? If you're not sitting at the table, you're on the menu, and that's what's happened to the American consumer.
Well, that's Dr. Oz over at the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. The plan is out today. You can go access it over at the website at the White House. Dr. Oz, really appreciate the time and the insight.
Bless you.
Alrighty, coming up, we are going to jump into the vaunted Ben Shapiro Show mailbag, but only if you're a member can you see such things. If you're not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro at checkout for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us. Today, we'll get into all the vicissitudes of the American economy. Are things going up? Are things going down? What the hell is going on? Plus, we'll get to a new poll showing where Americans agree and disagree, and a peace proposal on the table from the Trump administration with Russia and Ukraine. First, our Black Friday deal is here right now. Daily Wire Plus annual memberships are 50% off right now. Be one of the very first to watch the Pendragon Cycle, Rise of the Merlin. Join today. Pay half price at dailywire.com/subscribe. Well, the fate of the Trump administration and perhaps Republicans in Congress as well is tied to American sentiment about the economy. And right now, nobody knows what the hell is going on or which way is up. Yesterday, according to the Wall Street Journal, stocks surrendered gains and closed sharply lower after a whirlwind day of trading that began after NVIDIA posted strong results. The NASDAQ composite led indices lower after being up on the day more than 2%, and then it ended up closing 2.2% lower. NVIDIA itself actually finished the day down 3.2%. So they reported an actual profit of something like $62 billion, and they ended up down on the day. Why? Because people are expecting that there is, in fact, an AI bubble. And that expectation is not unreal. Again, whenever there's a transformative technology, people seem to think that just because there is a bubble, that means that the underlying technology is not transformative. If you look back at the history of investment, there is always a speculative bubble around brand new technologies, and then failing companies tend to get cleaned out, and you remember the successful companies. So you remember Henry Ford, because Ford ended up being a wildly successful company. But there were dozens of other automobile companies that were startups at the time that ended up crapping out. In fact, Ford had several of them before he actually started the Ford Motor Company. The same thing was true of the internet. When the internet bubble burst in 2000, everybody remembers pets.com as sort of the thing that represented the era. But what we should remember is that actually the internet has completely transformed everybody's life. We all work on the internet. We all do commerce on the internet. We all interact on the internet. The stock market bubble of 2000 did not mean the internet wasn't important. There were idiots like Paul Krugman who tried to suggest that it wasn't important. It was very important, but that is not mutually exclusive to a bubble. And that's also true with regard to AI. So people are looking at the current AI boom, and they're thinking that at some point here, it has to crap out. Some of these companies are just not going to be able to develop the kind of margins or gross income that justifies the investment they are currently making. OpenAI being the most obvious example of a company that is not publicly traded, but has so many contracts with publicly traded companies, ranging from Oracle to NVIDIA, that if it craps out, then that could take down a bunch of companies with it, or at least severely damage their market capitalization. According to the New York Times, it would not be a stretch to describe this period of hyperactive growth in the tech industry as a historic moment. NVIDIA said on Wednesday its quarterly profit had jumped to nearly $32 billion, up 65% from a year earlier and 245% from the year before that. Just 3 weeks ago, NVIDIA became the first publicly traded company to be worth $5 trillion, meaning NVIDIA is now worth more, according to the stock market, than the entire economy of Germany. But some industry insiders say there is something ominous lurking behind all the bubbly news. They are looking at the eye-popping growth and the same stunning wealth creation as Jensen Huang, and they see a house of cards. Even NVIDIA's growth can be explained away because, again, demand for the company's chips, it doesn't mean that people want to use AI. It means that companies are building giant AI systems in the hope that somebody will pay to use them eventually. And this is going to be the question. At some point, the productivity generation from AI is going to have to start matching up to the investments that are being made. Evan Conrad, a chief executive of San Francisco Compute, a startup specializing in AI, says Stargate alone, if it does actually reach $500 billion, would be the largest infrastructure project in the world several times over. Stargate is, of course, a $500 billion data center project in the United States, enough to fund the Manhattan Project 15 times over. It could pay for the entire Apollo moon program twice. So the amount of investment at some point is going to have to be channeled into actual gains. Goldman Sachs estimates NVIDIA, for example, will make 15% of all of its sales next year from what critics call circular deals. And so people are betting on whether there's going to be an AI boom that justifies all this or an AI bust. And we don't know which way it's going, which is why people are freaking out. They're also freaking out because if AI does succeed, there will be some temporary job dislocation. There are a lot of jobs that will become obsolete. If you want to hear me discuss this with Matt Walsh, Andrew Klavan, Michael Knowles, go listen to our episode of Friendly Fire. It came out a couple of days ago. We discussed this at some length. The history of job creation is that the economy becomes more productive. You get nicer things for cheaper prices. You work fewer hours. Your grandparents were working many more hours than you work. But it also means that there is, with technological change, significant job dislocation, people losing the kind of jobs they've historically held, and then they have to find new jobs, retrain. One of the points that I made to Matt Walsh, who's very critical of AI, is that if you named the jobs that many people hold in today's economy to people living in 1997, when the internet was first really getting started, if people in 1997 said, hey, this is going to destroy a huge number of jobs. For example, if you're able to buy everything from Amazon, a bunch of small mom and pop shops might go out of business, which is true. So what's going to happen to those jobs? Well, they and their kids are going to end up doing online marketing, social media management. They're going to end up having small micro businesses that use shipping via Amazon, right? All these things would have been unthinkable in 1997. Amazon was a used bookstore company. I mean, that's what it was. It sold used books to start. And yet we've generated millions and millions of jobs off of areas that we didn't even know exist. And this is just the way the economy tends to work. That doesn't mean that the angst and the heartburn about job dislocation are somehow false. And so two things can be true at once. We can be in a transformative, amazing time for the economy, and the uncertainty can be real, and the concern can be real, and it can't all be alleviated by the government. And so right now you have a lot of uncertainty and dyspepsia. Now, it is also true that some of what is being sold in the news is just not really true. So for example, there's been a lot of talk about housing unaffordability. And it is true that housing is way less affordable than it was in, say, 2020 in just pure dollar terms. Why? Well, because we inflated the currency massively between 2020 and 2024. The inflationary policy that was pursued in bipartisan fashion, by the way, in 2020 during COVID, when we had a massive artificial shutdown and the government paid everybody to stay home, was then followed on in 2021 and 2022 by even more massively inflationary policy under President Biden. Now, what that led to is an increase in the price of pretty much everything, but particularly housing, because when people didn't know what to do with their money, they figured, I'm going to plow that into the housing market. Because historically, the housing market has been an excellent repository of wealth. The way that you got wealthy is you bought a house, and then if you got richer, maybe sold that house and bought another house that was bigger and kept upgrading your wealth level. That's what my parents did. I think what many Americans' parents did. It's what I've done myself. However, there's some myth making right now about the price of housing in the United States. So Zohar Mamdani wins in New York and he shouts about housing unaffordability. And of course, he's right. New York is really, really unaffordable. We talked yesterday on the program about many of the reasons that is. Regulations, rent freezes, all of that makes it really unpalatable to build new units in New York. And many of the units that already exist, it costs more to rent them out to somebody than it would be to keep them empty. Like the maintenance costs on it, the taxes on it actually cost more to rent than to just keep it empty. So you have 50,000 so-called ghost apartments in New York City. Okay, but this is also obscuring a simple truth. In many parts of the country, the prices in housing have been on the decline, not the incline. Already coming up, we'll get to some things people think about the economy that just are not quite true. First, it's the one time of year that Birch Gold Group gives away free gold with every single qualifying purchase. That's right. For Black Friday, when you convert an existing IRA or 401k into a tax-sheltered IRA in gold, Birch Gold will send free gold to your home for every $20,000 purchase. Look, gold started this year around $2,600 an ounce. By October, it was over $4,000 an ounce. Why? Global uncertainty. 2025 has been defined by trade wars. Central banks are pulling from the US dollar as the global reserve currency, and military tension still continues to build. Gold thrives in times of uncertainty. That's why I bought more this year. And if you're looking to diversify your savings, Birch Gold can help you. Plus, now through November 28th, get free gold with a qualifying purchase. Just text my name, Ben, to 989898 to claim your eligibility and for a free info kit on gold. But your opportunity for free gold with purchase ends on November 30th, so don't wait. Text Ben to the number 989898 for full details. Again, text Ben to 989898 to get started. This opportunity ends November 30th. Also, I'm on the road constantly, unfortunately. I'm covering news stories, political events. I'm just on the road all the time. Hard to stay healthy on the road. And nutrition is the first thing that goes out the window. Here's the thing. I have to stay healthy, not just for work, but the wife and the kids. That's why I started taking Balance of Nature's fruits and veggies supplements. These are the original whole food supplements, 16 fruits, 15 veggies, freeze-dried into capsules. As somebody who keeps kosher, I appreciate that they're kosher. So, I can use them. 100% whole food ingredients, nothing added that should not be there. When I'm rushing through an airport, I can take them with water. If I'm in the car between interviews, I can chew them. Sometimes I'll open up the capsules and mix the powder into my smoothies. That's a go-to for me. However my day is going, they go with me. Balance of Nature delivers the natural goodness of fruits, veggies, spices, and fibers, just as nature intended, which means even when I'm 2,000 miles from home, I'm still taking care of myself the way my family needs me to. Balance of Nature makes me healthier. It's easy to use. Go check them out right now. After years of research and development, they've created something that makes getting proper nutrition convenient for any lifestyle. Head on over, balanceofnature.com, get a free fiber and spice supplement, plus 35% off your first set as a new preferred customer by using discount code Shapiro. So I asked our sponsors and friends over at Comet, which is a project of Perplexity, have housing prices gone down in populous areas, leaving aside New York, Chicago, LA, and Seattle over the last year? And according to Comet, housing prices have declined over the last year in several populous metropolitan areas outside of New York, Chicago, LA, and Seattle, with the largest decreases seen mostly in Florida, Texas, and some southern and western cities. Now, what you'll notice about that is those are all red areas where, by the way, population is increasing. So when you have areas like LA or Chicago or Seattle or New York, where population is leaving and the housing prices are increasing, you're reducing demand, and yet somehow you are still having the prices go up. That is regulation. That is regulatory overreach. That is the rationale. According to Perplexity, according to our sponsors over at Comet, Austin saw median listing prices fall by nearly 15% over the last 3 years and about 6% year over year. Miami's prices have dropped 19% over the last 3 years and roughly 4 to 4.6% in the past 12 months. Why did this happen, by the way? Because when there was a gigantic rush during COVID to Florida and to Texas, then one of the things that happened is the housing prices went up, right? Same supply, higher demand, higher prices. Okay, but then what happened? Every developer in Florida decided to build. The building went nuts in Florida. The building went nuts in Dallas and Austin and Houston. And so now there's more inventory. And then the demand slacked a little bit. Now the prices are down. Tampa has experienced a 6.2% year over year decline. Dallas and Houston saw home values decrease by 3.9% and 1.9% respectively. Atlanta recorded a roughly 3.1% decrease in home values. There are a bunch of areas, actually, that have experienced year-over-year declines between 0.9% and 4.3%. Many of the areas in the Rust Belt and the Midwest saw home prices increase, but some of that is because a lot of those home prices were already fairly cheap. Right? If you were looking at a house in Cincinnati, it's not going to cost you what a house in, say, New York would cost. Nationally, U.S. home values have actually remained mostly flat over the last year. So it's important to look at the contrasting areas. The United States is not homogenous. Saying that it's unaffordable to live in New York City does not mean it is just as unaffordable to live in Austin. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't affordability problems in Austin. Groceries, particularly, have been a major issue. And again, that's because the value of your dollar just is not worth what it once was because there are more dollars chasing the same number of goods. As Milton Friedman famously said over and over and over, inflation is anywhere and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. What he meant is you really get inflation as a factor of how much money the government is pumping into the economy. With that said, having to explain this, like explaining this in real ways, is the job of the Trump administration. And one of the things that they are falling into is this routine where they either say that people's feelings are fake, which, I can say because, again, that's my show. And I can say that facts don't care about your feelings, but politicians, feelings very often don't care about their facts. Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, he's been saying that the economic dyspepsia is fake news. Well, it may be true that much of what is being distributed about the economy is fake news. The dyspepsia is not fake news by the polling data.
It's just fake news. You've got so many factories being built. You know, I know people talk about when the factories come online, but the construction jobs alone, you can't invest $3 trillion a year without driving our GDP off the charts. You're going to see 4s, you're going to see 5s, and you're going to see 6% GDP growth under this president because the factories coming home, the tariffs are bringing them home.
Okay, so again, it is not true that the tariffs are bringing manufacturing home. That is not true by the statistics. However, some of the angst about the economy is in fact overstated. The idea that you absolutely cannot get a job anywhere. We have a 4.4% unemployment rate. Okay, by historic rates, that is actually close to full employment. And in many of the high-tech industries, we actually still have more job openings than we have job applicants in some of these areas. Meanwhile, the vice president is begging Americans for patience, which, the problem with begging people for patience is that they are not patient.
And even though we've made incredible progress, we understand that there's a lot more work to do. And the thing that I'd ask for the American people is a little bit of patience. This economy was not harmed in 10 months. It took a deliberate 4-year administration that was making life harder for everyday Americans, that was importing foreign workers instead of giving jobs to American workers, that was over-regulating, overtaxing, overspending. They were doing everything wrong. And as much progress as we've made, it's going to take a little bit of time for every American to feel that economic boom.
Okay, so we will see if that is true or if that is not true. Okay, but one of the things you actually do have to explain to the American people comes with some strings, right? If you explain, as I just did, that the economy is heterogeneous, that living in Florida and Texas is not the same thing as living in New York, and that blanket solutions are not going to work the same way. That is a politically difficult thing to do, but it is a politically necessary thing to do, because otherwise people are going to look at the solutions that you are proposing, and when they don't work the way they think they should, when the housing affordability crisis in New York does not alleviate, they blame you for that. Right? You see some of this in the marketing from the administration. So the Department of Homeland Security, they put out a tweet yesterday in which they basically suggested that every single problem in the United States can be attributed to illegal immigration. Now, there are a lot of problems in the United States that can be attributed to illegal immigration. But to sort of use the hammer available to treat every single thing as a nail is a mistake, and no one's going to buy it. They put out a tweet yesterday that said, rent is too high. There are tens of millions of criminal illegals in our country. Okay, so first of all, there is some truth that there is upward housing pressure based on the population. That is true. It is also true that illegal immigrants are likely to be living, many people, to some of the cheapest housing in America. They're not the ones who are taking up suburban houses for the most part. Groceries cost too much. There are tens of millions of criminal illegals in our country. Again, higher demand is true, but there aren't enough jobs. There are tens of millions of criminal illegals in our country. Women don't feel safe walking down the street. There are tens of millions of criminal illegals in our country. Okay. Again, I'm not even arguing that criminal illegal immigration does not actually drive up prices or create traffic or put pressures on the healthcare system. All of that is true. But the conclusion here, which is many problems, a simple answer. No, actually, many problems may have one factor that is a simple answer, but that is not the only factor. And pretending that it is likely to result in, again, fruitless promises. Because first of all, this administration they're not going to deport 20 million illegal immigrants. It's not going to happen. The administration is deporting some people, for sure. We have seen one of the tremendous achievements of the administration is that the job growth that has occurred under the Trump administration is going to American-born workers. It is not going to foreign-born workers, illegal immigrants, and the rest. And that's a good thing. But promising a panacea is a mistake, because then people expect more than they are likely to receive. Now, with that said, Democrats do the exact same thing. Hakeem Jeffries, the House Minority Leader, yesterday, he suggested, so if J.D. Vance is suggesting that home ownership is unaffordable due to illegal immigration, which again, maybe on the margins true, but that's really not why housing is unaffordable as a general rule. Hakeem Jeffries is saying that home ownership is unaffordable because of climate change, which is just insane.
Home ownership has become unaffordable in far too many places, ripping away the possibility of home ownership for millions of Americans. And we know that home ownership has always been central to the great American dream. And so it's incredibly important that we deal with the climate crisis Because there is only one Earth. There is no planet B. We have no other option.
Okay, well, I mean, really? So your solution to affordability is to yell at the sun? Good luck with that. Yeah, folks, there's stuff that's solvable and there's stuff that is not solvable. And there are solutions being provided that are real, and then there are ones that are not particularly real. When it comes to the economy, the best thing the government can do is get the hell out of the way. As both a mid-range and a long-range strategy, that is the best thing the government can do. You can always have a short-range strategy, a sugar high where the government pumps money into an economy, or the government subsidizes an industry, or the government regulates out of existence some sort of practice. You can try all those things. They are short-term, temporary solutions that actually exacerbate the midterm to long-term problems. And until somebody in politics says the truth about the way that free markets work, things are likely in the midterm and the long range to actually get worse, not better. This is the thing. Many of the solutions that Trump is actually pursuing are free market solutions. And those are the ones you should be talking about because they are, in fact, working. They are, in fact, doing the thing they're supposed to be doing. Already coming up, we'll be joined by Stephen Moore, economic advisor to the President of the United States. First, if you're ever worried about the safety of your home, you need to hear about SimpliSafe and their early access Black Friday sale. Traditional security systems only respond after somebody has already broken into your home. SimpliSafe works differently. With Active Guard outdoor protection, AI-powered cameras can detect threats while intruders are still outside and then immediately alert real security agents who spring into action. Here's what makes this a true game changer. Those agents don't just watch, they actively confront the intruder in real time, speaking directly to them through the camera to let them know they're being watched. The police are on the way, if necessary, triggering a loud siren and spotlight. While other systems have cameras that let you talk to intruders yourself, they depend on you seeing the alert in the first place. SimpliSafe's monitoring agents have your back 24/7, confronting threats even when you're not available, which means they can actually stop crimes before they happen. We've got SimpliSafe for the studio, means that, all this beautiful stuff around it, it'll still be here in the morning. Plus, there are no long-term contracts or hidden fees. You can cancel anytime. No wonder they've been named Best Home Security Systems by U.S. News and World Report for 5 years running. Do not miss out on SimpliSafe's biggest sale of the year, 60% off. Right now, our listeners can save 60% off on a SimpliSafe home security system at simplisafe.com/Shapiro. That's simplisafe.com/Shapiro. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. Also, Black Friday deals are live. Right now, at Jeremy's Razors, we are taking up to 50% off. You want a full year of shaving? $49.99. That's it. No games, no virtue signaling, just a damn good razor that works. And if you're ordering over $100, free shipping. These razors are built for men who don't back down, guys who show up, work hard, and refuse to cave to the nonsense. Head on over to jeremysrazors.com right now. Don't wait. Black Friday will not last forever, but your commitment to not funding those woke corporations, that is permanent. jeremysrazors.com. Behold this. I show you the Precision 5 razor. See this right here? This could be arriving in your mailbox very, very soon if you head on over to jeremysrazors.com. And inside, an amazing shave awaits. Go check it out, jeremysrazors.com. Joining me on the line to discuss is Stephen Moore, former economic advisor to President Trump and co-founder of Unleash Prosperity, an organization dedicated to educating policymakers and the public about government policies that have been proven to maximize economic growth. Of course, he's the host also of the More Money Show. Stephen, thanks so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Hi, Ben. Thanks so much for having me.
So let's talk about the state of the economy. Honestly, I feel like everybody is confused and bamboozled about what is happening in the economy right now. There are a lot of different cross currents that are sort of competing for supremacy. Why don't we start with where we are just generally in the economy? Do we have a good economy? Do we have a bad economy? Do we have an unsure economy? Where are things right now?
Well, you just used the word bamboozled, and I like that word a lot to describe what's going on in terms of the media perception of the economy and frankly, a lot of Americans. So let me start with the very big picture, if I may. And one of the reasons I love doing your show in particular, Ben, is because you're reaching an age group that I don't speak to very often. That is young people. I know that because my two sons are big, big fans of yours. So first of all, my advice to young people is stop complaining, stop whining. What are you whining about? This is the greatest time ever in the history of the world to be alive. And this is the greatest nation in the history of the world to be in. And so the opportunities are abundant today. The average young person is going to have a living standard that is double the living standard of my parents. So stop complaining. The jobs are out there. Look, I know there's some, a little bit of contraction in the job market right now. But look, when I graduated from college, we had a 10% unemployment rate. We had 15% inflation. It was a terrible situation. I'm bullish on the U.S. U.S. economy, I think anybody who gets off their buff and gets off their computer games and watching TV and goes out and get a job, they're out there. And one other quick piece of advice to people under the age of especially 25, the best thing you can do is get a job. Even if you're 19, 20 years old, 17 years old, the younger you get your first job, Ben, the more successful you will be in your life.
So let's talk about some of the issues that people are themselves apparently feeling and talking about. The big one, of course, is the continuation of inflation. Obviously, the rates of inflation have come down radically under President Trump. And the thing that I keep talking about on the show is that it is true that President Trump has sort of stabilized the inflation rate. But the thing that people are comparing the prices to are not the prices last year. What they're actually comparing the prices to in their heads are prices from 2020. And those prices are just not coming back, because the only way to get those prices to come back would presumably be an actual economic downturn involving significant unemployment, because we blew too much money in the economy. Unless you're going to suck amazing amounts of money out of the economy, those prices are basically going to stay where they are. And that is, in fact, Joe Biden's fault and not President Trump's fault.
Well, okay, good point. So first of all, let's address the first point that you make, which is that we just did some numbers at Unleash Prosperity, starting from the beginning of the pandemic, COVID, to today, 87.5%. Almost 90%, 87.5% of the inflation that you're feeling when you go to the grocery store, when you pay your rent, your utility bill, your medical bill, 87.5% of that happened under Biden, not Trump. And Trump is right to say, look, I inherited this inflation mess. I didn't cause it. In his first, just some numbers, in Trump's first term, his first 4 years in office, the inflation rate was 2%. Biden comes in 18 months after entering office, the inflation rate's 9.1%. And over the average of his presidency, it was about 5 to 5.5%. Today, the inflation rate is, somewhere between 2.5% and 3%. Now, that's a little too high. We want to get it down to the Fed target, which is 2%, which is the sort of rate of growth of the overall U.S. economy. But Trump is right to say, look, I didn't cause this crisis. And especially, by the way, Ben, in the case of healthcare, where if you really want to see a villain here for the high cost of living, look at President Barack Obama, who said that his signature achievement as president was to, you remember this, they passed Obamacare. And people like me said this is going to blow a lid off of spending. It's not going to work. It's going to bankrupt the country and bankrupt the healthcare system. And that's exactly what has happened. Obamacare has led to a doubling to tripling of healthcare prices in the last 15 years. Thanks a lot, Barack. You did a great job.
So, there are some other questions with regard to inflation that I have. And one of them is the president has constantly called for a lowering of the interest rates. And to me, I'm talking with investors, it doesn't seem like there is a lack of liquidity in the economy. Typically, you lower the interest rates when there's a lack of liquidity, when it feels like there's an economic contraction that's happening. You're not going to lower the interest rates when the economy is running hot and when the stock market continues to churn and when the inflation rate is still riding about 50% higher than the Fed's target rate. By the way, I'm a Vienna school guy, so I think that the inflation rate target should actually be 0, not 2%. But,
okay,
putting that aside,
I can live with that.
The attempt to push the Federal Reserve into lowering those interest rates, as though what we really have is a problem of spurring liquidity and consumption. Why is the president still pushing that? Wouldn't he be better off at this point basically just saying, listen, the Fed policy is what the Fed policy is, and let's work on deregulation and freer trade, for example?
So let me put this in a big, broad perspective, because I'm what you call a supply sider with, Art Laffer and Larry Kudlow and Ronald Reagan and Steve Forbes. And the reason they call us supply siders is that we believe that the best solution for almost every problem in the economy is to grow the economy, increase the supply of goods and services, increase production, because it's very simple. And it's amazing how many even PhD economists don't understand this universal truth. Ben, if the economy produces more apples, what happens to the price of apples?
Price drops.
They go down, right? So if you want less inflation, produce more. And in fact, even you sort of we're saying, well, maybe we're going to need, a recession to lower prices. That's not true. The way you bring down prices is to produce more and get people working and getting people to produce more. That's number one. Point number two, I believe that there is way, way, way too much emphasis in Washington on Wall Street on what the Fed is going to do. The Fed does not control control the interest rate. Let me say that again. The Fed does not control the interest rate. You said you're an Austrian economist, so you know the interest rate is set by the law of supply and demand for credit. And so all the Fed controls is the overnight interest rate. Do you borrow at the overnight interest rate? No, you don't. I don't. Almost nobody does except for banks. No. And so my point here is that, and even Trump, and I love Trump. I'm a Trump guy. I was one of his advisors. I think he's been an amazing president, but he's wrong on this. Whether the Fed lowers or raises interest rates is not going to necessarily affect the mortgage rate of the 10-year Treasury bill. And I'll give you evidence of that, Ben. Back when Biden was president, the Fed lowered interest rates 3 times in 2024. And what happened to the mortgage rate?
It went up.
It went up. So why is that? Because what affects the long-term interest rate is what we call inflationary expectations. That if you believe, let me keep this very simple, Ben. If you believe that the inflation rate is going to be 5%, are you going to lend me money at 3%?
No, that'd be idiotic.
Right. Well, that's sometimes a lot of idiotic thinking in Washington. We got to grow our way out of this. I'm very proud of the fact that because of so many of Trump's great policies on reducing taxes, reducing regulations, producing more energy, we are seeing we're starting to see the inflation rate go down, and we've achieved almost 4% economic growth. That's a phenomenal rate of growth over the last 6 months.
Okay, so meanwhile, there are a lot of worries, obviously, about AI, and not just about AI itself. I tend to be an optimist when it comes to tech, but about whether we are actually in a stock market bubble, because the vast majority of gains in the Dow Jones Industrial Average, for example, have accrued to the Mag 7. The Mag 7 represent an extraordinary percentage at this point of all stock market growth over the course of the last several years. Obviously, NVIDIA's numbers are eye-watering and eye-popping. According to the markets, the company NVIDIA is now worth more than the entire economy of the country of Germany. And so, when you look at NVIDIA, and then you look at the sort of circular deals that are being made between, say, NVIDIA and private companies like OpenAI, where OpenAI is talking about expending $1.4 trillion in capital over the next 10 years just on data centers and data infrastructure, and they generated a $20 billion return this year. There are a lot of people, including me, are pretty nervous that we may be in an AI bubble. Not to say that AI isn't important, but two things can be true at once. AI can be really important and transformative. Sure. And also, whenever you get a new technology, there tends to be a lot of speculation in that area. And then it tends to consolidate down into the most productive companies. This happened with the internet. Hell, it happened with cars. Yes. So would we be surprised if this happened with AI as well?
Well, I could probably talk to you for about 45 minutes about AI, and there's a lot in that question, but I'll just make a couple of observations on this. Number one, I mean, I'm so envious of younger people like you. I'm 65, but especially people in their 20s and 30s, you're going to see the most amazing economic transformation over the next 25 or 30 years. I mean, it's amazing what is coming. Just to give you an example, Ben, I just joined the board of a company called Lightspeed, and we build houses with robots. Within probably how long? I mean, in 10 years, there won't be truck drivers. All trucks will be automated. Already in a lot of parts of the country, Uber and Lyft cars are automated. So you get in the car, and by the way, this dramatically reduces prices because you don't have to have a human driving the car. A machine does. This is very much like the revolution that happened in agriculture 100 to 150 years ago, where it used to be 35 out of every 100 Americans was working in the fields, and now 2 out of every 100 work in the fields, and we produce more food than we can possibly consume. And so this is going to be an exciting period ahead. You asked the question of whether there's a bubble. Maybe. I'm a little nervous about it too. But think about this. I mean, you want to, go USA. We have 7 companies, the Magnificent Seven. You mentioned a few of them: Amazon, Apple, Google, NVIDIA, Microsoft, Tesla, Meta, that are worth more than all of the companies in Europe combined. So we need to dominate the AI and robotics age the way we've dominated the internet age. How did we do that as a country? What was the key to making America so completely dominant in the internet age? You know what it was? Back in the mid-1990s, when, of all people, Bill Clinton, a Democrat, was president in a Republican Congress, we passed a bill that basically said we are going to make the internet tax-free, subsidy-free, and regulation free. And we just created the Wild West. We just said, go out there and build these companies. And we built these amazing, amazing companies. You're right. There's going to be some sorting out. You may recall that in 2000, there was a crash in the technology market. It was a pretty deep crash because prices did get overvalued. But, that's the way markets work.
Well, meanwhile, there is dyspepsia. You mentioned young people and the job market. And because the educational system is now, we're in a transitional economy, right? We're in a period where we're moving from agriculture to manufacturing, or manufacturing to service. I mean, it is that large of a shift. Right. And so there is real concern, and I understand it on an individual level, about the job dislocation that's going to happen, right? There's no question that, for example, automating trucks is going to make things more efficient. It's going to bring down prices for the vast majority of Americans. Where do the truck drivers go is always the question. Right. And so, I think that this is one of the dangers for the Trump administration, or for any administration that's in power, because there is the creative destruction that Shapiro describes when it comes to markets is real. And there is a destruction half to that creative destruction, meaning, in 10 years, all those people will have new jobs. But what happens in the meantime? What would you say about the potential of AI to wipe out huge numbers of jobs? And how long do you think it takes for that to move through the market and then create new jobs that we've never even heard of yet?
Well, the whole idea, let's just start with what economics is all about. It's about increasing production of goods and services. And the idea is to create as many resources as possible with the least amount of work, right? And labor. And that's what's essentially happening with this, just like it happened with the age of the tractor and then the age of the computer and now the age of AI. I'm very concerned about our education system. I don't think we're preparing young people for this revolution. I mean, you got kids that are graduating with political science degrees and psychology degrees and ethnic study degrees, and guess what? There's not a big demand for that right now. So they're spending sometimes $200,000 for a college degree that it really isn't very worthwhile. I believe just one tip for young people, and I said it before, but I'm going to say it again. The younger you start working, Ben, the evidence is crystal clear about this, and it's been true for 200 years. The younger you start working and getting that first job, the more successful you will be in your life. And people go, "Oh, Steve Moore's for child labor." I'm saying, look, my wife grew up on a farm. She is one of the most productive people I've ever met. She's incredible. She started working. She's 11 years old, cleaning out the stables and things like that. So this idea that you got 25-year-olds who haven't worked.
Well, that is Stephen Moore. You can go check out all of his work over at Unleash Prosperity. Stephen, thanks so much for the time. Really appreciate the insight.
Thank you, Ben.
Alrighty, coming up, Zoran Mamdani headed to the White House. How will that go? We'll get into it. First, our best deal of the year. It's happening right this very instant. Daily Wire Plus memberships are 50% off. It's honestly hard to find something negative about that, even on the internet, even on social media. Well, probably on social media you could if you really tried. But anyway, you get uncensored, ad-free Daily Wire shows an hour early before anyone else. You get live chats with the show. You get investigative journalism. You get our entire library of premium entertainment. And that does include the Pendragon Cycle Rise of the Merlin, premiering January 22nd, except that all access members get exclusive early access on Christmas Day to the first 2 episodes. Go to dailywire.com/subscribe. Save 50% on your Daily Wire Plus annual membership right now. Okay, well, some of this is likely to come to a head today when Zoran Mamdani, the communist mayor of New York, is to arrive at the White House. That is happening around 3 p.m. today. Apparently, they're going to be meeting behind closed doors, so it won't be one of those open sessions like with Vladimir Zelensky earlier in the year, which would have been the most amusing form of all of this. Zoran Mamdani says he wants to speak plainly to President Trump about affordability. This is according to the New York Post. Mamdani gave a City Hall Park news conference on Thursday. He said, "I have many disagreements with the president. I believe we should be relentless and pursue all avenues and all meetings that could make our city affordable for every single New Yorker." Well, I mean, he could start by resigning. That would probably be the best way to start making it more affordable to live in New York. He said, "I intend to make it clear to President Trump I will work with him on any agenda that benefits New Yorkers. If an agenda hurts New Yorkers, I will also be the first to say so." The White House is significantly more skeptical of Zoran Mamdani's visit. Here is Caroline Levitt explaining.
It speaks volumes that tomorrow we have a communist coming to the White House because that's who the Democrat Party elected as the mayor of the largest city in the country. I think it's very telling, but I also think it speaks to the fact that President Trump is willing to meet with anyone and talk to anyone and to try to do what's right on behalf of the American people, whether they live in blue states or red states or blue cities.
Yeah, by the way, it is also true that Zohran Mamdani continues his unbroken record of virtue signaling to the worst people in America. So one of the big controversies that is broken out in New York is that just the other night, a bunch of anti-Semites, and I use that word advisedly because of what they were yelling, gathered outside of an Orthodox congregation in Manhattan's Upper East Side, chanting from New York to Gaza, globalize the Intifada. Again, globalize the Intifada, that is a violent call. Okay, Intifada is a violent uprising. Calling to globalize the Intifada in New York means go kill people in New York. That's what that means. So why were they outside a synagogue yelling? I mean, by the way, they're also chanting, resistance, you make us proud, take another settler out. They consider every Jew in Israel to be a settler. I don't know how else to describe that other than Jew hatred. I mean, that's what that is. They were literally outside a synagogue in New York. What were they protesting? There's a group called Nefesh B'Nefesh in Israel that facilitates for people who want to move to Israel. If you're in England, America, wherever, they help facilitate your move to Israel. So how did Zohran Mamdani respond to the anti-Semitism? Well, he blamed everybody. His spokesperson said, quote, the mayor-elect has discouraged the language used at last night's protest and will continue to do so. He believes every New Yorker should be free to enter a house of worship without intimidation, and that these sacred spaces should not be used to promote activities in violation of international law. That is an insane statement. Nothing that was happening in the synagogue violates international law. First of all, there are a few problems. One, international law can go screw because it's the most useless pile of crap that ever was conceived by man or anyone else. It's ridiculous. There is no such thing as international law. There are just international interests. The notion that there is a governing body that decides what is right and wrong, that includes Russia and China and Iran, it's absurd. It's ridiculous. American domestic law protects First Amendment religious activity. International law typically protects some of the worst people on earth while attacking places like America, which is why the United States is not a party to, for example, the International Criminal Court that Zohran Mamdani likes to cite. The International Criminal Court used by human rights violating regimes like South Africa as a sword against any place they don't like. Ridiculous. Okay, but beyond that, again, from a purely American perspective, New York is not an international city. It's an American city. If you're an American living in an American city and your mayor is saying that you can't go to your synagogue or church because you might be, quote unquote, violating international law. I mean, listen, there are international standards that pertain to, for example, the quote unquote abuse of religious materials that largely are focused on not violating the scruples of radical Muslims. There are in fact bodies that prosecute acts like that under hate speech. Is that something that we're going to do in the United States because Zohran Mamdani says it violates international law? What a joke he is. Truly a joke, and more than that, a dangerous joke. All right, it's time for some fast fact. Hey, let's begin with some fascinating polling data. This is from Gallup. Americans are actually showing some consensus on issues. I know, it's shocking. Those issues are, for example, democratic values. So, asked whether political leaders should compromise with the other party to get some things done, even if they don't like some parts of the compromise, or whether political leaders should stick to their beliefs and avoid compromise, even if nothing gets done, 80% of Americans believe that political leaders should compromise with the other party to get things done. Now, of course, when you dig beneath the hood, the question is, what's the nature of the compromise? But Americans are not actually, in fact, begging for kind of the wild partisanship that was demonstrated by the Democrats during the latest government shutdown. On political violence, 83% of Americans say it is never okay for people to use violence to achieve a political goal. And by the way, that does include a broad majority of Democrats. This one is kind of fascinating. On the question of whether the U.S. is stronger as a nation because it has people from different races, religions, and cultures, or the U.S. is weaker as a nation because it has people from different races, religions, and cultures, 84% of Americans believe the United States is stronger as a nation because it has people from different races, religions, and cultures. That America is not, in fact, homogenous. Now, we will get into another under-the-hood question in a minute here from this poll about how fast American culture has been transitioning, which is the real objection that many people have. And that's being misread. That objection, which is a very real and legitimate objection, is being misread into a critique of America as a creedal nation entirely by large parts of the right at this point, where people say things are changing too fast. We don't want this many people coming in. Mass migration is changing the fabric of the country incredibly fast and in the wrong ways. Those are all legitimate perspectives, and they are all perspectives that I think most Americans probably agree with. However, to read that into, okay, what we need is a homogenous nation, racially, religion, like totally homogenous. That, of course, is not traditionally American, and it is a massive electoral loser. On facts versus opinions, 88% of Americans say there are facts and then there are opinions. Only 10% of Americans say facts are just opinions and points of view. Okay, so again, some of the breakdown here is really, really interesting. So that under the hood question that I think is the big one that is dividing the country, basically right down the middle, is the nature of change in America. The right is not anti people of all races or people of a wide variety of religions, while acknowledging, of course, the biblical heritage of the United States. The question is the pace of change. So, according to this Gallup poll, for this statement, please indicate which comes closer to your view, even if neither is exactly right. Over the past 25 years, cultural changes in U.S. society have happened too fast, or cultural changes in the United States have happened at a reasonable pace over the course of the past 25 years. So that answer is 49-49. 49-49, right? Literally half and half. Half Americans think things are moving too fast. Half Americans think that things are moving kind of reasonably. The age breakdown is that as you get older, people think things are happening too fast. Democrats overwhelmingly think that things are happening at a reasonable pace, 2-1. Republicans, 2-1, think that things are happening too fast. Independents are split exactly 50-50. This is the nature of the division in the country. This is the nature of the division in the country. But here's the thing. There is no one complaining that the change is happening too slowly. Okay, that is the real key to this poll. No one is saying that the change is happening too slowly, that we need to accelerate the pace of change in the United States. No one is saying that. Again, that's fascinating, because what that means is that the sort of radical left, which wants to accelerate change, is not going to be popular, and a radical right that also wishes to radically decelerate, like change in the opposite direction or to a place that America never historically has been, that is not what Americans want. Virtually all Americans believe either that the pace of change is about right or that's moving too fast. Americans are an incremental people. We are not a radical change people. That is not what we are. Okay, another basic split among Americans is whether people are responsible for their own needs on a basic individual level or the government is responsible for making sure the basic needs are met. Directly 50-50. Directly 50-50 again. Democrats, 70-30, believe that the government should be responsible for making individuals' basic needs are met. Republicans, 72-27, believe the opposite. So despite the sort of populist movement believe that they can just side with the Democrats, most Republicans do not believe this. Republicans are still pro-free market and individual responsibility. This is, in fact, a hallmark of conservatism. And the bizarre attempt to sort of retcon conservatism into a left-wing social democratic populism from Wisconsin in 1918 is bizarre, for sure. By the way, independents are split right down the middle. Slightly more independents believe that people should be responsible for maintaining their own basic needs than that the government should be. Okay, meanwhile, again, the bottom line is that there is discord here, but this is the Overton window. Okay, the Overton window in America, meaning the place of kind of rational discourse, is in the middle of all of this. There are a lot of open questions to be left there, but there are a few things that Americans are pretty clearly rejecting overall. 1, political violence. 2, the idea you should never talk to or work with anybody on the other side of the political aisle. And 3, radical, fast change. Radical change. Americans don't love it. They are not in favor of it. They certainly don't want things accelerating from here. So any accelerationism from either side is likely to be rejected by the American people. Okay, meanwhile, our media are very much focused on accelerationism and partisanship and exacerbating it. And again, this is not to avoid blame for partisan politicians who also do it. But I have to say that things are increasingly stupid here in the United States. They're truly stupid. So yesterday, the big story of the day was a rather stupid story. It was led off by a bunch of Democrats. We put up their video yesterday. This is a bunch of Democrats ranging from Senator Alyssa Slotkin of Michigan to Representative Crow, Jason Crow of Colorado, calling on members of the military to disobey illegal orders. Now, we should note what this is and what it isn't. There's what it says, and then there's what it implies, and now we're playing in the dumb space between them. So, what it actually says is not illegal. Telling people they don't and cannot obey illegal orders, that of course is true. Duh. right? If somebody gives you an order to go mow down a bunch of school children for no reason, and there would be no reason, if someone tells you to go do that, then you have to disobey that order if you're in the U.S. military, obviously. Okay, so the question becomes why they filmed that video. And the answer is because the implication is that the Trump administration is routinely giving illegal orders, and thus you should just disobey the Trump administration. So, once again, we are living in stupid land, where Democrats will interpret this video as saying nothing new, and Republicans will interpret this video as saying that members of the military should disobey legal orders, not illegal orders. Here is the video.
Like us, you all swore an oath
to protect and defend this Constitution.
Right now, the threats to our Constitution aren't just coming from abroad,
but from right here at home. Our laws are clear. You can refuse illegal orders.
You can refuse illegal orders.
You must refuse illegal orders.
No one has to carry out orders that violate the law or our Constitution.
We know this is hard and that it's a difficult time to be a public servant.
But whether you're serving in the CIA,
the Army,
or Navy,
the Air Force,
your vigilance is critical.
And know that we have your back.
Okay, so this pissed off President Trump, I think kind of justifiably, because the implication is that President Trump is routinely giving illegal orders, which of course is not true. Well, that then caused the President of the United States to put out a statement on Truth Social in which he said that these lawmakers were guilty of what he called, quote, seditious behavior punishable by death. Which, I mean, is that true? No. I mean, no. And there's not a court in America that could convict them of seditious behavior punishable by death. Right? That is actually not seditious behavior punishable by death. You may say that it is seditious behavior, but saying it's punishable by death means like a legal violation. They would have to go to trial. You'd have to make the claim that they were actually inciting treason against the government. Okay, by the way, unlawfully failing to follow an order is not, in fact, punishable by death, even in the United States military. He wrote, quote, each one of these traitors to our country should be arrested and put on trial. Their words cannot be allowed to stand. An example must be set. Now, here's the thing about President Trump. We're all used to this by now. Are we going back to 2017 when everybody just went nuts with their hair on fire about the crap that he was putting on, at that time, X, or what was called Twitter at the time? Like, we've done this before. These sort of bizarre news cycles where Trump says something that is uncalibrated, to say the least, and then everybody runs around like a chicken with their head cut off. Can we just point out, Trump is not actual. I understand that now we're doing the reverse, right? Democrats are going to read that comment. They're going to say, he is literally calling for them to be arrested and put on trial and executed. And if you read the language, that is literally what he is calling for. And then there's the reality, which is Trump is not going to do any of that stuff, which we all know, obviously. When Caroline Leavitt was asked if President Trump wants people executed, here's what she had to say at the White House.
Just to be clear, does the president want to execute members of Congress?
No. Let's be clear about what the president is responding to, because many in this room want to talk about the president's response, but not what brought the president to responding in this way. You have sitting members of the United States Congress who conspired together to orchestrate a video message to members of the United States military, to active duty service members, to members of the national security apparatus, encouraging them to defy the president's lawful orders.
Okay, so again, the answer that matters there is the beginning, where she says, no, he doesn't want people executed. Democrats, of course, decided to jump on this and then make hay out of it, as one would. So apparently, Democrats put out a statement from Mark Kelly, Alyssa Slotkin, Jason Crow, Krista Luzio, Maggie Goodlander, and Chrissy Houlihan, who are the people in the video, in which they said, what's most telling is that the president considers it punishable by death for us to restate the law. Our service members should know that we have their backs as they fulfill their oaths to the Constitution, an obligation to follow only lawful orders. It is not only the right thing to do, but also our duty. So they're going to, rely on the literal thing that they said, which, again, understandable. And they're going to avoid the implication of what they said. This is what Representative Crow had to say in his own defense.
To be clear, we are not calling on folks right now to disobey any type of unlawful order. Right? There is very real and deep concern about what this president has threatened to do over and over again. There are 3 more years left of this administration. If we are not talking about this and having a conversation about it and demystifying this conversation, then we are not fulfilling our duty. We are reminding people that have taken the oath what that oath requires of them to do.
Okay, can I just point out this whole controversy is incredibly stupid, like truly stupid. The Democrats put out there something inflammatory. President Trump bit on the inflammatory thing and said something even more inflammatory. And now everybody is just taking their various sides and complaining about it. This is a stupid controversy. Okay, it's a stupid controversy that was generated by the left predominantly. President Trump, again, went too far in his comments, which, like, I know. Like, we've seen him for 10 years. Come on. Okay, and then everybody went nuts in response. Okay, now, there's sort of a parallel stupid story, and that is that the president and vice president were not actually invited to the funeral for Dick Cheney. So I have a rule about funerals. The family gets to invite who they want. That's my rule about funerals. Nobody gets to make a claim that they should have a seat at somebody else's funeral. That's really, really silly. Now, I have a critique of who the Cheneys invited to the funeral. It actually has nothing to do with Trump and Vance. Okay, I totally understand. If you are Dick Cheney and you opposed Trump and Vance, and Trump and Vance routinely attacked Liz Cheney, and Liz Cheney has a horrible relationship with Trump and Vance, I totally get that. Your dad is dead, and he's in the box in front of you on the stage. You don't want to be looking over and seeing the people who basically destroyed your political career and who you attempted to foster impeachment charges against in President Trump or go after him post-January 6th. Like, I totally get that you don't want that at the funeral, right? I mean, just on a human level, you understand that. I think the bigger question here is why, for example, President Biden was invited. Because if you're talking about somebody who helped destroy Dick Cheney's legacy, one of those people would be Joe Biden, who as vice president was very much in favor of the precipitous withdrawal from Iraq that led to the loss of some of the gains that had been actually made in the late stages of the Bush administration with the 2007 surge. And then also it was Joe Biden who presided over the complete collapse of American support in Afghanistan, handing the entire country back to the Taliban. So, yeah, I have more critiques of the Cheney family for inviting Joe Biden than I do for the Cheney family inviting and not inviting Trump and Vance. But, you know, the right is going a little bit nuts over this. I don't know. I'm just not there. I'm just not there. When it comes to funerals, basic rule, you get to invite who you want. Joining us in studio is Michael Whatley. He most recently served as chairman of the Republican National Committee after President Trump asked him to help lead the party's 2024 efforts. He also previously served as the North Carolina Republican Party chairman. Now he's running for Senate in North Carolina. Michael, thanks so much for taking the time. Really
appreciate it.
It's great
to be on with you. Thank you.
So your race, I think it is not an exaggeration to say that in 2026, it may be the most important race in the country. The amount of money that's going to flow into this race is extraordinary. It is a purple state with an open seat. Tom Tillis is stepping down from that seat. So how does the race look? Why is this race so important?
Well, the race is so important because North Carolina is a true bellwether state. You know, it's one of the 7 battleground states that we fought in 2016, 2020, and 2024. And it is very close. Like you said, it's a purple state. We're 30% Republican. We're 30% Democrat. We're 40% unaffiliated. So it's true purple. And as North Carolina goes, I think, honestly, the Senate can go. And when you talk about having a hold, you know, we talk about a 3-seat majority in the Senate right now for the Republicans. You know, that gets pretty dicey if we cannot hold on to North Carolina.
That's exactly right. I mean, when you look at the map, you're looking at North Carolina, you're looking at Maine, you're looking possibly at Texas, possibly at Iowa. It's not an easy map for Democrats, but if they take North Carolina, the map starts to get significantly more blue quickly. One of the problems in North Carolina is that it used to be a little bit more red. It's obviously moved more purple in recent years. There's a bad gubernatorial race last time around. Josh Stein is now the governor in North Carolina. You're facing down Roy Cooper, the ex-governor of North Carolina. Where do you think his vulnerabilities are? What should people in the country and in North Carolina know about the former governor?
Well, I think the fact that he is a card-carrying member of the woke mob, and he has portrayed himself very successfully throughout his tenure as an elected official, as an aw shucks guy from Nash County, North Carolina, trying to portray himself as a moderate. But the fact is that this is a guy who has a record that is out of mainstream with North Carolina, whether it's on crime, whether it's on, you know, the budgets and tax cuts and the economy, or it's on, you know, any number of other issues where he is out of the mainstream. But we need to spend the time prosecuting that case and letting people know about his record.
So when you talk about his record and in specific, you know, what went wrong under his tenure in North Carolina, what do you think are sort of the big points that the people need to know?
Sure. Well, when you think about how you win in a state like North Carolina, right, or really any battleground state around the country, what we did with President Trump was we made it sure that everybody understood his agenda, which was to rebuild the economy, to restore our borders, and to make sure that America is respected again around the world. What that translates to in North Carolina is you need economic policies that are going to create jobs and raise wages. We need tax policy, trade policy, and regulatory policy that are going to help our small businesses, our manufacturers, and particularly our farmers. So we're going to go out and we're going to work on that all day long. We also have more men and women in uniform and veterans than any other state in the country. So being able to ensure that they have what they need to protect our interests and allies around the world is going to be extraordinarily important for us. And in this particular race, we really want to spend a lot of time focusing on the fact that the highest and most important function of any government is protecting its citizens. And we have a governor who has not only vetoed legislation which would force sheriffs to honor ICE detainers and move criminal illegal aliens out of the state, he also issued an executive order while he was governor that created cashless bail, created pretrial release, and really emptied the jails. And so we have a revolving door with criminals right now, with violent criminals in North Carolina that has caused a huge problem. You know, many people recall that video, the horrific video from Charlotte Light Rail, where Irena Zarotska got off work at 11:30, beautiful young lady, gets on the wrong rail car, sits in the wrong seat, and the guy behind her just horrifically slit her throat and killed her. That guy had been arrested, DeCarlos Brown Jr., 14 times and released 14 times under Roy Cooper's soft on crime policies. You know, it is so prevalent. We actually on the campaign started a digital campaign called Mugshot Mondays. And every week we highlight somebody who's been arrested and released 50 times or more in North Carolina. That's absolutely unacceptable. And so when we think about what are the issue sets that really are going to matter in a place like Charlotte, in a place like Raleigh, in a place like Wilmington, North Carolina, in our rural areas, our urban areas, it's going to come down to making sure that we're keeping our kids and our communities safe.
And as I mentioned before, the amount of money that's going to pour into this race is extraordinary. Democrats are expected to raise just tons and tons of money to try and take this seat. It would be a flip, obviously. How much money are they going to raise for this race?
You know, we're hearing projections as much as $600 to $800 million is going to be spent in North Carolina. You know, and it was one of the most expensive Senate races in history back when in 2020, the last time we were up with Tom Tillis, and that's the seat that I'm going to be running for right now. So, you know, it is as you said, the Democrats understand that this is, you know, one where they think they can pick this off. Roy Cooper has raised a ton of money for his governor's races previously, and we know that he's going to have a ton of money. So we're out making sure that we have the resources. But I firmly believe, and Donald Trump is the most clear example of this in our lifetime, that good politics is a reflection of good policy. And that when you go out there and you argue for the issues that the American people vote on, in my case, the issues that the North Carolina voters care about and put solutions on the table, that ultimately is going to be the most important factor in the race.
So for people who want to help out your campaign, obviously it's a huge campaign. You've got to get started early. So where should they go to help you out?
MichaelWadley.com. You know, that's the website where folks can go and they can invest. They can also sign up to be a volunteer. You know, this is going to be a movement campaign. We need to make sure that we have people that are up and that are out, that are going to be making phone calls and knocking on doors. And most importantly, having that 5-minute conversation. You know, anytime we have somebody have a 5-minute conversation with a friend or a family member, a colleague, a coworker, to talk about how important this race is, that's really, truly the most important factor that we can have. And they can also follow me on X at WatleyNC. We've got, you know, about 100,000 followers, and we've got a really good presence there and talk about all the issues that we really care about in this race.
Well, meanwhile, while the Democrats are spending enormous amounts of money or looking at spending enormous amounts of money in North Carolina, they're having some cash problems of their own. So obviously that used to be your job at the RNC. When you look at the Democratic National Committee having to take out a $15 million loan, what does that say to you?
Well, I think it says that the Democrats have really, truly learned nothing after the 2024 election cycle. You know, they ran as an open borders, inflationary policy, woke, weak America party. They lost. They lost the House, they lost the Senate, they lost the presidential race, and they've really, truly doubled down on that agenda right now. It's not a surprise that they cannot raise the type of money that they are used to having, right? And the Republican Party, you know, we set up a very positive relationship with donors and supporters all across the country, and we're able to make sure that we had the resources that we needed. When I left the RNC, I think we were $85 million cash on hand for the DNC right now. To have $3 million cash on hand before that loan, I really think it shows you that not just physically they're bankrupt, but in terms of their agenda, that they do not have an agenda that is inspiring the American people right now.
Well, Michael Watley, good luck in your race. Thank you so much for stopping by. Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Really appreciate it.
Joining us on the line is investigative reporter for the Daily Wire, Luke Rosiak. He is also an award-winning journalist. He just won an investigative journalism award for his Doge reporting, the prestigious Dow Prize. Luke, thanks so much for joining the show. Really appreciate it.
Hey, Ben. Thanks for having me.
So congratulations on that. Explain what the Dow Prize is and why it matters.
It's sort of an alternative to the Pulitzer Prize for conservative-leaning or independent journalists. And it's sort of a big deal. This guy named Dao Feng, who's a businessman who escaped communist China and loves America, teamed up with the National Journalism Center and kind of went all out. So there was this, fancy gala in D.C. on Wednesday. Everybody was there in the Washington, D.C. conservative reporting world. And they gave out some big prizes, including big cash prizes. And all of this is because the Pulitzers, of course, have given awards to left-wing stories that are literally provably wrong.
So let's talk about your reporting on Doge. Obviously, you won an awards for going inside what Doge was doing. What has been the long-term impact of Doge? Because obviously it was a very hot topic very early on in the administration. It seems to have fallen out of the headlines a lot. What do you think the impact of Doge was and is?
We've got to make sure it has long-term impact. I think the best thing that happened was sort of just a renewed enthusiasm, putting the idea that we as conservatives should be against government waste back on the radar, because it was certainly something we had kind of forgotten about for a few years there. Obviously, they've got to deal with the injunctions. They've got to make sure that not too many layoffs are kind of reversed because of things like the shutdown negotiations. But I think that really it just was a return to sort of founding principles, that this is a classic thing that Republicans should be concerned about. So there was a lot more attention to things like inspectors general and the Government Accountability Office and people like that, who hopefully will be empowered and will be sort of in the spotlight, even as Doge itself kind of recedes.
So, Luke, obviously one of the big factors here was the involvement of Elon Musk. Elon and the president have had some, hot times, have had some cold times. It's been a love-hate, lukewarm, very hot, very cold relationship. Where do things currently stand with the president and Elon?
I believe he was in D.C. this week. Traffic was certainly shut down during the awards ceremony. It was very difficult to get in, and I think that's because they had Elon and the Saudis and some others all at the Kennedy Center. So I think they're buds again.
So, Luke Rosiak, congrats again on winning this prize. It's very cool for you, very cool for the Daily Wire as well. That's Luke Rosiak, our investigative reporter here at the Daily Wire. Luke, thanks for the time.
Thanks, Ben.
Alrighty, folks, the show continues for our members right now. We'll get into a strong pitch from the president to Ukraine about a Russia-Ukraine peace deal. What does that look like? Is it good? Is it bad? Remember, in order to watch, you have to be a member. If you're not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro at checkout for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us.